Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Roundup. I gotta warn you all right to start, I can't see. I just got back from the eye doctor and my pupils are all dilated like I just ate a handful of mushrooms. I can't see the screen. I can't see any of the stuff I'm doing. I can't see if I'm in focus. Heck, I couldn't see it if Voltar was sneaking up behind me trying to. I think I'm just going to have to wing it this time and just warn you all in case it gets bad. They gave me some Sega Master System 3D glasses to wear just to bring the brightness down, but I still can't really see anything. So wish me luck. I'll apologize in advance if I mess this one up, but I never want to miss them, and I don't see my eyes getting better anytime soon, or at least not before Wednesday. So let's cross our fingers and hope I don't mess this one up. First up is last week's Mr. Updates, care of Lou from Lou's Retro Source. Lou told everybody that throughout the holiday season, his videos are going to be a bit sporadic, so I'm just going to do them as they come out and keep you all updated that way. But hopefully you're all subscribed to Lou anyway, and you can get these updates as they come out. But let's run through and see what we got. First up, Spark 2K06 has created a way to launch movies using Zapperoo, which was previously called Tap2, but same exact thing, just a different name. And that means you could launch movies using NFC cards. The ARM system on a chip that's on the DE10 Nano isn't powerful enough to play high resolution content, so you'll be limited to something like 320 by 480, or a 320 by 240, sorry, so 240p. And hopefully Mr. will be able to get 480i output working, and maybe even with videos, because I think for anybody who has this connected to a CRT, it could be a fun player. But even if you're just doing this for fun, I think this is a cool idea, so thanks to Spark for doing it. Next, user HS Newman on the Mr. Forums has been able to get the Unix-like operating system NetBST working on the 486 core. And that's a free Unix-like open source operating system that's available for a wide range of platforms. Next, RetroFrog released their USB-C to 5-volt barrel adapter, which will let you power either the DE10 Nano or the QM Tech FPGA boards over USB-C. Now, you're probably waiting for some long, wordy warning from me about this, as I always do about power supplies, but this is an easy one. Just make sure your USB-C adapter has enough amperage, the exact same way I would tell you make sure your barrel connector adapter has the same amperage. But because you're just going 5 volts, nothing else really matters. Just use a quality USB-C adapter, high amperage one, and you should be fine. And if you use a lower one, I don't really know what would happen. It would probably turn off the DE10, or you'd have weird issues with accessories like with the original DE10's power supply. So this, I think this is a good idea, and I think this one should be pretty easy for people to use. Next up, Christoph Helms on Twitter developed a Plex client to stream video content from your Plex media server to the Mister. You're still going to be limited to low-res content because of that ARM chip, but Plex can transcode your media to a format that Mister can handle. So this is an awesome step in the right direction, but once again, we really need 480i support for something like that to be possible. 480i support would also allow for a slightly higher resolution menu, which would allow you to use the on-screen menu for things like, going through any of the TUI based stuff. Like, when you go to update all and you press up to go into options, you could do that on a CRT in 480i mode much easier with something like that. So if the developers feel like adding that, cool. They have much better things to worry about, but I think a dedicated 480i mode would be really fun for both video content as well as just menu support. So, once that hits, I think this Plex idea is going to really be even better, because then you could really just take any of the DVDs that you've ripped, old TV shows, anything that would really fit well on a CRT, and just stream it right through there. Next up, Taki did an interview with Aiden Walls that goes into his experience with product development, ethics in open source hardware, production issues, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you're into it, definitely check that out. Another update to the beta Konami Bubble System core was released, and on the post, Reiki mentions that this core encodes and decodes the original data. It's an inefficient method, but that's the way the original system worked. I'm actually not really sure what that means, but my nerd brain is really curious about that. So, would anybody be able to, who has inside info on this stuff, be able to explain a bit in the comments? If not, don't worry about it. It's just to satisfy my own and probably other people's nerdy curiosity. But moving along, the SNES test core with save states recently got an update, which makes things a little bit easier, and it also has the save state file auto loaded as boot1.rom. And this requires the latest unstable main build, so you'd have to manually install this, but it looks like it's coming along, so it'll eventually just be rolled into a standard update. And thanks to anybody working on that as well. Also, the Mr. Laggy core has been updated with a bunch of new features to support the new I/O boards, an option to test the left or right of the screen, which is super handy, and there are now markers on the edge of the screen, so auto resizing displays don't get triggered. That's cool. That's a very handy feature. And Yosinda and WARC updated the PC88 core with a bunch of different changes. So, as always, thanks to Lou for keeping up with all of this stuff for me. There is no chance I could do this. So, I have completely relied on Lou for all of my Mr. News since we started promoting it here. So, if you rely on Lou as much as I do, consider supporting on Patreon. Next up, Stone Age Gamer is now selling the Harmony Cart, which is an awesome ROM cart for the Atari 2600 or any console that plays 2600 games like the 7800. There's two versions to choose from, and each have, I think, three different choices of stickers and case combinations or cartridge combinations. But the two main features that each have, the base cart supports games up to 8K in size, and the Encore cart can support games up to 512K. And if memory serves correct, you could basically play the entire retail library on the cheaper one, but a lot of the awesome homebrew that's out there will only play, or at least a handful of the awesome homebrew will only play on the more expensive one. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. The prices range from $50 to $75 depending on which options. And this was, I've got a lot of experience with the Harmony cart, and it just worked awesome. I have no complaints about it. And I believe I originally got mine through Atari Age, but now the fact that you could just get it right at Stone Age Gamer with a bunch of other amazing ROM carts, I think is really handy for everybody. And I wanted to call that out here to let everybody know. So if you have original 2600 hardware or anything that could play it, this is definitely something to consider because a lot of cool homebrews out there for it. And, the 2600 library, the main games aren't super expensive, but even if you already own them all, it's always so handy to just have them all on one cart. Next up, MegaCat Studios have just announced a physical release for the homebrew SNES game Excitium Event, which is a reimagining of classic arcade titles Space Zap and the Astrocade title Space Fortress. And all profits from this will go to support the Child's Play charity. So if you were looking for a new SNES cartridge that looks like a pretty fun game with proceeds going to a good cause, absolutely check out Selena's post. There is a preview video embedded in here if you want to see what the game is like, and links to everything you need are right in here. So, I can't really argue with something like this. A neat looking new game, for Super Nintendo, which there aren't nearly as much retro or new retro games for, plus it's all for a good cause. So please check out Selena's post for more info if you're interested, and the game looks pretty neat. Next up, Muramasa just released the Famicom RAM cartridge for the Famicom Disk System in an NES cartridge form factor. So it's going to take me a minute to explain this one, so if you don't care at all about original hardware, you could skip to the next section, but I think my fellow nerds might at least be interested in what this is, even if the product isn't for you. But essentially, the Famicom Disk System was a two-part add-on for the original Famicom. One of them was the disk drive itself, which sat underneath the Famicom and accepted the disks, and that connected with a cable to the Famicom RAM module, and that plugged into the top of the original Famicom and had a cable that went to it, and also included the extra expansion audio chip, which is why some of the Famicom, or basically most of the Famicom Disk System games, had slightly different or even better audio in certain cases. Now, you could technically use some kind of cartridge adapter to adapt the original to like a top-loading NES, but it was kind of wobbly, it didn't really work out. So Muramasa came up with a way to take those original Famicom Disk System RAM modules, take the original chips out of them and put them onto a new custom board that goes inside an NES shell. And there are two versions of that. One has a cable coming out of it, and that's meant for the top loading NES. That's also meant for any of the FPGA hardware consoles, like the analog ones or the retro USB AVS. I don't know if it'll work on clone consoles, certainly not software emulation based ones like the Retron 5, but maybe some of the ones with the NES on a chip that are NTSC. You'd have to try it yourself. And then the other version that's available is for front loading NESs. And that's just a standard NES cartridge with everything built into it, no cable at all. But it also has a port on the bottom an adapter that connects to the port on the bottom that connects. It's essentially the same cable, but that way. And then you could route your new cables out the bottom of the NES to go directly into the original Famicom disk system disk drive. This also has the same expansion port as the RetroTime adapter, so you could use almost any of those accessories as well, especially like the one that was just released, the SNES controller adapter. That would work on this, as well as any kind of Famicom expansion port stuff. So the front extra port in the Famicom is the one I'm talking about. So the 3D glasses, the keyboard, all of that stuff. There is a bunch of things that you're going to want to know about this, though. First, the version that's everything's built into the cartridge with the cable is 200, and the other version with the port that plugs into the bottom of the front loading is 250. So this is definitely for people who you have original Famicom disk system games, you have the RAM module and a Famicom and the disk system, but you want to run it on your NTSC NES consoles instead. It's not for everybody, but I guarantee you there's a bunch of people out there that's like, that's awesome. I get to have the Japanese experience on the US version or whatever. But this will be for NTSC only, not for PAL at all. And this is actually because the BIOS for the disk drive has hard-coded timings that don't work once you switch to PAL. So it's not that it would run slower, like a lot of NTSC games if you use an adapter, but it would just not work at all. And you would have to have somebody rewrite the BIOS, but then you'd have to patch every Famicom disk system game to also work as well. And at that point, you should just be using some kind of FPGA emulation, whether it's a ROM cart or a MiSTer or whatever else in order to get that. Just my opinion, but kind of makes sense. Also, if you are using a top loader, you would still have to do the Famicom expansion audio mod to it on the inside in order to get all of the audio channels. But remember, you would have to do that anyway, even if you were using the original Famicom stuff through a cartridge adapter. So that's kind of one of those things where if you're using a top loader, you're probably expecting that anyway. And so that's basically the full overview for it. I personally think this is incredible. I think that there's probably a bunch of people with front-loading NESs that are just going to go, this is awesome. This is a plug-and-play Famicom disk system adapter. Now I get to finally play the all-original versions of Metroid and Zelda with those soundtracks on them. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other people listening going, that's awesome, but I'm just going to play it on my MiSTer. Both are perfectly good answers, but I'm really happy that this is at least an option. And we'll see where this progresses. Obviously, this is a limited production because it requires original Famicom RAM cartridges in order to work. So while yes, those are cannibalized, I don't think that. I just think that this is kind of a low quantity project that's really for enthusiasts. So I'm standing behind this one, but let me know your thoughts. Maybe there's different ways we can go about doing it. Maybe we could try to find new versions of older chips that could be worked in so that we can make homebrew versions, even if it's not 100% the same. If it's like 99, maybe it'll work. I don't know. My dev friends are all far smarter than me, so maybe some of you would be able to figure that out. Next up, Crix just posted a firmware update for the Mega Everdrive Pro that fixes a potential compatibility issue with Sega CD or Mega CD RAM save files, but it also is a new way of updating the firmware, and it requires you to convert your original Sega CD save files if that's something that's important to you. So right off the bat, if everything about your Mega Everdrive Pro is working fine as is, and you have a ton of Sega CD save files, you might want to just leave it as is. But I'm assuming all future updates will be with this new method, so you're going to have to convert at some point. So let me walk you through it. First and foremost, The change to the Sega CD save files is that it's now limited to 128K because that's the max the original cartridge was allowing. And the fact that the Mega Everdrive Pro's Sega CD save files could be larger was causing issues with certain games. So bringing them back down and capping it at the original max would be the same that, ensure much greater compatibility. And you could have multiple files, so it's not like you're limited to just this one. However, in order to convert those to be compatible with the new format, you're going to have to manually copy those to your internal Sega CD save memory and then copy them back after the firmware update is done. So if you have a ton of those save files, you might just want to stay on the version 4.2.0 firmware. But if you only have a few, or if it didn't really matter to you and you don't mind just erasing it and starting over, then it's not a big deal. As for the new firmware update, you have to first go to the previous firmware of 4.2.0, which was earlier in 2024, so many of you will probably be on it anyway. But if not, it's the update file is in the same spot. You just extract the zip file, and then when it boots, it's going to say, push A to begin update. When it's done, you'll get a full screen after a reboot, and it'll say settings have been reset to defaults. Press any key. That means it all works. And then you want to update to the new version. So after you're running version 4.2.0, copy the latest .efu file to the root of the Mega Everdrive Pro, and then power on your console and run that file as if it were a game, and you'll be prompted with a menu that allows you to hit install firmware. Then you'll get a, don't turn off the system while it's updating message, and after it reboots, you'll get that same settings have been reset full screen message. And then if you wanted to double check, you could just bring up the device info menu, and you'll note that the firmware is 24.1129, which is just a side note. As a nerd with OCD, I love that now this is a date code for the firmware, because it'll make it easier for my brain to figure out when these things were out and what's the newer one. So that's just 24 is in 2024.1129, November 29th. I love it. I've been doing stuff like that for years, and it just makes my personal sorting a lot better. So thanks, Crix. Also, Crix included with this new firmware the ability to calibrate the built-in real-time clock to improve its accuracy. I will be fully honest, I don't know why that's necessary. Can anybody smarter than me please explain that in the comments? But if you wanted to know how to do it, I took a look at the PDF, and essentially you first calibrate your PC to make sure that the real-time clock is accurate within 0.1 seconds, and then you verify using the time.is website, and you connect your Mega Everdrive Pro to your PC via a USB cable and run the #1 start calibration batch file from the zip file, and do it right after setting your system clock so it's as accurate as can be to the server. And then about a day later, the longer time the better, you resync your computer with the online server again, and then run the end calibration batch file, and then you'd be able to have a perfectly calibrated real-time clock, which will deviate about 5 seconds per month if battery voltage and ambient temperature is stable. So please let me know if you can think of a scenario in which that's very important. It's certainly not going to be if your favorite games are like Sonic the Hedgehog and Mortal Kombat and stuff like that. But I'm also very curious on where that would be something that applies to a real life use case. If you want to have the full list of changes since the last update, just check out the post. And overall, just to repeat, like, my Mega Everdrive Pro was working perfectly. If I didn't want to make this guide to help people update theirs, I personally probably would have just left it at 4.2.0. But what happens when Crix comes out with the next update that has some cool feature that I want? I would have to go through all this anyway. So I figured just bite the bullet, convert the Sega CD files, get it up on the new firmware, and then the next time you could just run the file. Oh, and you could delete the file after it's done anyway, right in the menu if you wanted to. So I just forgot to mention that before. But hopefully this simplifies it a little bit for people, because it was a bit confusing at first. But, if not, check out the post and message Crix or go to the forums at least if you have any questions. Next up, Pixel Effects have just announced that the analog bridge will once again be delayed. In their latest press release, they said they found an issue related to crosstalk, and they've fixed it but they're waiting on samples for a final revision. Now, in their previous releases, they had stated that the hardware for the analog bridge was 100% completed and ready to go. So the fact that they found the issue means they need to have another prototype made to make sure it's fixed, and then have another production sample made up to make sure it doesn't go out to you all with a problem. So they're hoping to still get it out by the end of the month, but realistically, I would say it's probably going to be longer than that. They did say that the 3DO RetroGem HDMI kit is still on schedule for this month, with the GameCube and Wii versions to start production after the 3DO ones are already released. If you want to read the press release yourself, you can check it out right here. Their previous press release talked more about the analog bridge. I linked to that in the post as well. But I do want to share my kind of strong opinion about this. I wholeheartedly stand behind the decision to press pause on this until it's ready. Because while, yes, early adopters of the Morph, I'm sure, are pissed that it's been over a year since they were supposed to have been shipping this. But, this is something where they worked really hard to try to get this right, and to find an issue in the last minute like this, it stinks, but how much better is it that they found it now than after everybody started getting their units and they had to scramble to get some kind of fixes or recall done? So I personally think that they made the right decision by delaying. And if it's another month or two, it's already a year. So whatever. Maybe it will still be by the end of December, but as somebody who's been designing and manufacturing products with teams for almost 20 years now, I could say that it's very likely going to be longer than just by the end of this month. But I'm just saying that as a emotionless fact. That's not a dig or a compliment. It is what it is. I also really think it's very smart to release one of these retro gems at a time, because even if things go 100% correct, there's always going to be some back and forth with customers, making sure they got their units. What happens if it gets lost in shipping? Some people are going to need some more support because maybe, especially with a new product, there isn't that much info and that many other experienced installers out there. So I think releasing one at a time is also a very smart move. And I also think that having clear and concise press releases like the last two are a great idea as well, because I think any reasonable human, even if you get pissed at first, could come back to this and go, hey, at least they're being honest, and at least they're keeping us in the loop. We're not waiting months with silence, wondering what's going on. We all just know. So, I'm interested to see how this thing works. If you want to read my thoughts about this, you could go back to the original post and figure out what podcast corresponds with that. But, I guess this is just one of those things that we'll have to wait and see what advantage this has over any of the other options. But I'm glad it's coming along, and hopefully we'll see it soon enough. Nick from Pandemonium Reviews just released his latest documentary on the Sega Saturn game Toga King, which was called High Velocity in the US. And this is another top-tier documentary that was really fun to watch. This was only, quote unquote, only an hour and a half, not 4 hours long like some of the others. But it's a very interesting story, and it certainly explains why the game plays the way it does. It's one of those things where if you're into old video games, if you're into history, if you're into nerdy stuff like video game development, this has all of those things. And I enjoyed the thing start to finish. And I really hope that Nick's channel starts to get more subscribers and more people start to watch these documentaries. Because even though, especially after watching the documentary, I don't think I have much desire to play the game other than just for a couple of seconds of let's see what this is like. I really enjoyed watching it and kind of seeing the development process and how everything worked out. I also love Nick's sense of humor. So, maybe I'm just a dork that likes that stuff, but I'm totally okay with that. So if you would like to read more about this, there's a quick summary of what to expect. Definitely check out the documentary if you're interested. And there are links to support Nick if you are as much of a fan of his work as I am. So, and just as always, I'd like to mention that while this post was written by Nick, I asked him to. So I encourage self-promotion when it's the proper fit for RetroRGB. And I truly think Nick's Pandamentaries I don't know. I was trying to think of a stupid joke to throw in. Whatever. Just watch it, because if you like the Saturn or old video games or dev stories, this is a fun one. And I think he has one or two more coming, but the one that I'm so looking forward to is the documentary on Double Switch, because what a weird game that I was never able to figure out, but I tried a whole bunch of times. I'm really pumped for that one. But to hold you off, definitely check out this one as well. Well, that's it for this week. I actually had a couple more posts almost ready to go. There was a Tink 4K update. There's a few other things coming, but nothing super time sensitive. And I had planned on just doing them before I recorded these, but I still can't really see anything. So I figured, let me record these while I have time, and then later on in the evening I can go back, and hopefully I could still see by that point, I could re-edit and get this podcast all up for you by the normal Wednesday mornings. But yeah, I was hoping things would get back to normal by now, and they're getting there. But yeah, this kind of threw me for a loop. I thought I was going in for a 10-minute eye check, and they dilated my eyes and did a whole bunch of other stuff. And apparently I'm not going nearly as blind as I thought I was. I just needed a different prescription for when I'm doing stuff like working on my computer or doing soldering or things like that. So hopefully I could see better after a couple of days, and hopefully I could see it really at all but by later tonight. So as always, thank you for all of you for putting up with me, my dumb jokes, and my trying to record these when in the very few moments I have free, even when I can't see. I can't thank you all enough for sticking with me. I try to do my best, but life happens, and days like today are just something that I got to deal with sometimes. So hopefully you all found it a little bit funny, especially the squinting, trying to read the post, remember what I wrote or what other people wrote. But if not, all should be back to normal by next week, and everything should just flow like it normally would. So anyway, thank you to everybody who watches, listens, plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to any supporters, because I could never do any of this without your help. So thank you all so much, and I will see you, hopefully, next week. This week's Roundup is brought to you by Neo Paradigm Entertainment, connecting Southeast Asian influencers with opportunities in the West.